On November 11th, 2008, Activision would release their latest Call of Duty title. This release obviously ended up being Call of Duty World at War. World at War would be released on PC, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, the Nintendo Wii, the Nintendo DS, and the PlayStation 2. World at War instantly became a lot of people's favorite Call of Duty game, and for good reason. When World at War was released, people were already getting tired of the World War II era Call of Duty games. So Treyarch knew they had to do something special to this one to make people actually buy it and want to play it. Not only did World at War have a great campaign, multiplayer, and mod support, but they also included a new game mode never seen before in any other Call of Duty game. This game mode was obviously Nazi Zombies. Nazi Zombies was in every version of World at War besides 2. It probably doesn't surprise you to hear that the PS2 and Nintendo DS versions of Call of Duty World at War does not have Nazi Zombies. You will be surprised, however, to hear this is not due to any kind of console limitations. We know this because Call of Duty Black Ops 1 did have a zombie survival mode on the Nintendo DS. It was really just due to the fact that the developers was just playing around with zombies and they didn't even know if it would kick off in general. Also, the Nintendo DS version and PS2 version wasn't even developed by Treyarch, it was developed by two separate game developers. A company by the name of InSpace actually handled all the Call of Duty games for the Nintendo DS. A game developing studio by the name of Rebellion would develop the game for PS2. Whenever the worst Call of Duty game gets brought up in discussion, two Call of Duty games stick out the most. Those two games being Call of Duty Ghost and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. If you actually like one of those games, then you'll be glad to hear neither of them is the worst Call of Duty game ever made. At least in my opinion. Like I said before, the DS and PS2 versions of World at War does not have Nazi zombies. However, the DS version does have an online multiplayer alongside its campaign. If you take a look at the PS2 version developed by Rebellion Studios, you will be met with a little bit of sadness, not gonna lie here. The game only features a campaign and a campaign only. This means no multiplayer, no zombies. The game has 13 levels and takes about 3 hours to complete. The PS2 version of World at War was also titled a little bit differently, being World at War Final Fronts. This means it's not exactly the same game either, as the campaign does focus on different parts of World War II than the original World at War. Final Fronts for the PS2 actually acts as a spin-off to the original World at War. Whereas it is cool to see different parts of the story being told in different locations and being basically a whole different game, it still suffers from not having multiplayer or zombies. What makes this even worse than the DS version of World at War is the fact that it had an actual online functioning multiplayer where the PS2 version don't. If you think about it like this, back around the time World at War was released in 2008 for the PS2, you would have ended up paying $39.99 plus tax at the nearest GameStop. For a 3-hour long campaign with about 13 missions to it, it's not really worth the $40. Like, imagine going into a GameStop, buying World at War for the PS2 and realizing you're only getting a very short campaign, whereas your buddy who buys it on a DS gets a fully functioning multiplayer mode. I would also like to point out that this was the very last Call of Duty released for the PlayStation 2, and that prior Call of Duties on the console did have online functioning multiplayer modes. A lot of people's favorite Call of Duty being Call of Duty 2, the big red one. Which brings up the only positive thing I can really say about World at War for the PS2 is how bright and colorful it actually looks when compared to the other Call of Duty games on the console. For those of you who've actually played a Call of Duty game on PS2, then you know exactly what I am talking about. For those of you who don't, all you have to do is look at these two games side by side and see exactly what I mean. World at War Final Fronts for the PS2 is absolutely the worst Call of Duty game on the PlayStation 2 and quite possibly the worst Call of Duty game ever made in general. I did do the research on it because I was really curious as to why this Call of Duty game was just so terrible, and it's because exactly what I suspected already. Not only was Activision's goal at this point switched to the newer generation of consoles, but Rebellion Studios was left with a really low budget and no time whatsoever to work on this game. And yeah, you could say Call of Duty 3 and Vanguard was also rushed but had more content, but it also had a higher budget than what Final Fronts did. Activision has never really given out the budget for how much they put into World at War Final Fronts, but we can already assume it was pretty low. The PS2 was and still is sometimes considered one of the best gaming consoles ever released. So the fact that Activision handled the last Call of Duty game to be released on it like this is kinda crazy. Activision wasn't even keeping it a secret that they were done with the PS2. Even though I am considering this the worst Call of Duty game of all time, I am not blaming that on the developers at Rebellion Studios. I really feel like if they had a higher budget, the rest of the game would have been amazing. Because like I said, it is definitely the better looking Call of Duty on the PlayStation 2. Even if this game never would have got Nazi zombies, people would have probably enjoyed the online multiplayer actually being able to see on a brighter screen. For the people who were forced to rush this game out over at Rebellion, you guys did absolutely amazing. If I had anything else to say about it, I can kind of get past the fact that it doesn't have zombies, considering this is the first time even Treyarch tried it in their version of World at War. However, the fact that it's the last Call of Duty released for the PlayStation 2 and Activision didn't even bother to give them enough budget for a multiplayer is very concerning. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I did try to keep my promise and switch it to a whole different game other than just Mortal Kombat. I will be going back to those eventually, but this channel isn't just dedicated to strictly Mortal Kombat. It's dedicated to any game that really gives me nostalgia. If you did like this video, however, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel. I will see you guys in the next one.